doing like a debunk or just talking about Destiny's video on reparations. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Reparations aren't about the opportunity cost of being a slave. It's just about money that was promised and owed and not paid out.
WTF are you talking about? The people it was owed to are already long dead. And now you are going to take money from people who don't owe anything? Never makes sense how you will criticize.
True. I don't get why people like, yeah, slavery's obviously bad. We should have done more to maybe, to help them at that time. But to say that we should just pay money because like that happened, because you're white, you have the sin that you were born with. You were born with on the backs of slavery, and so you must pay for it, even though individually have done nothing wrong. This collectivist mindset shit is just, it's dumb. I understand how sometimes it can be helpful to look at things in a collective, but if you're thinking about like, if you see it as because of the color of your skin, you're doing something wrong, then that's when you have to look at it like an individualist mindset. So there are upsides and downsides to both mindsets. But I feel like Destiny or just lefties in general don't switch often enough or at all.
People like Demon Mama but then do some of the same BS yourself.
Okay, let me walk you through this. Let's say that my dad was enslaved by your dad, okay? And let's say that your family now has a lot of money because your dad enslaved my dad. Let's say that before our dads died, let's say that your dad promised my dad, hey, I'll pay you $5 million for this work. Let's say that both of them die and he breaks that promise. He breaks his contract and he doesn't actually pay him out. Now let's say we live where your family is rich off of the works of my dad's slave labor that your dad never paid him for. And my family is broken poor because my parents wasted all their time doing slave labor and they were never compensated for their work.
So even in this vacuum scenario, I don't think it really works out all that well, because just because my dad like reneged on his promise does not mean that I have to pay for what my dad did. Like I don't agree with that. In a vacuum, it doesn't make sense because you're taking an aggregate and you're treating it as the whole, which is what you accuse one of your chatters of doing. It's, the white dad is super rich because of what happened to the black dad, the slavery, so therefore that white dad should have to pay. First of all, this hinges on the idea of redistribution of wealth not being a fucking, like, not only a terrible idea, but an immoral thing to do. Robin Hood was a fucking thief. But, like, if you believe in redistribution of wealth, then sure, I guess this makes sense. And you also, lefties have this thing where it's like, they can't differentiate between like the father and the son. They feel like the sins of the father go down to the son, which explains why they attack Barron Trump, because they don't like Donald Trump. It explains, and I don't mean this is like a personal attack or anything, but the reason so many lefties, none of the righties have ever done this, the reason so many lefties have attacked your son is because they just see your son as an extension of you. It's that same kind of lefty mindset being used against you.
Now you're saying you, who as a descendant...
I don't think that just because someone has a lot of wealth that they have a duty to pay, like to have that wealth redistributed to the poor. I think if they want to be a charity, which is a way better way to do things than federal government taxation, if that's what they want to do, hot diggity damn, I support you all the way. But I don't think that just because they have a lot of money means that they should have that redistributed.
White America benefited from that slavery. Whether you like it or not, whether you're rich or poor, you as a class have.
I hate that fucking class. He bitches at people for being class reductionists, but he's basically race reductionist. Like, that's the funny thing. It's that white people as a class... No, I'm not... It's funny he accuses conservatives of being identitarian, but he literally says white people as a class have... And while I guess I could see how that's true, I don't see how, because a promise was made by one individual, that collectively all the white people should pay for collectively a lot of black people's reparations. I just don't see that.
Probably have an obligation to make right at least on the promise that was made.
No, it wasn't your promise. It was not your promise. Just because, some white man down the line, like a long time ago, promised to do something, just because you are white does not mean that you have to follow up on that promise.
There was a compensating
especially when you were so far removed from the situation.
People for the wages that they hadn't been paid. I might be dumb, but were the slaves promised money or were they forced into slavery? There was a promise made. This is where the 40 acres and a mule line comes from, that there was going to be some amount of land that was going to be set aside after the Civil War where people were going to be paid at no more than 40 acres and then provided like livestock or whatever to farm land. So there was going to be like black owned towns or rural towns or whatever. And that was a promise that was going to be delivered afterwards. And then I think it was the next president that came in basically just said, never mind, we're reneging on all of that. Fuck you. And then that...
Yeah, because redistributing land is a horrible fucking idea. That's basically like socialism, communism kind of shit, which I think you oppose, but I guess, I don't know, after this video, I don't know. You know, people on the left bitch at Republicans for kind of blending, like, sock damage socialist and, like, liberal. They bitch, oh, Republicans, I'll just call us socialist, but one, I don't think you could tell me a difference between a Democrat and a socialist on tax policy. Two, you guys all kind of play to the same ideology. You kind of intentionally or unintentionally blur the lines to where it's easy to make a left to alt-left pipeline.
Promise wasn't kept. Why should we be forced to pay black people money because of our white people's past? I thought you cared about people changed.
True.
I can't tell what's wrong with you. It's not about revenge, and it's not about, like, people change. It's just about, like, oh, like, this is a contract that was promised, and...
So I think in most versions of reparations, this is not true. I think this is your idea. I think if it were to be introduced, or if it were to pass through, this would not be it. It would not be like, oh, only the black people that were slaves. It would be just black people in general. Like, you get money.
And it hasn't been paid out. Like, this was promised by the United States government. Like, we have the money to pay it. We should probably make good on that promise.
So, this is one thing. Okay, so, if you believe... This is really funny. Do you think Joe Biden should continue work on the wall until it's finished? He should continue building on the wall because President Trump promised it. There was a promise to the American people that the wall would be built. And you know, do you think Joe Biden should drain the swamp? Do you think that was a promise? It was reneged on. It didn't get finished. So, do you think Joe Biden should do it? Do you think Joe Biden should take up the mantle of Trump and finish that promise? Or do you think maybe things have changed and that promise can't really be kept until Ted Cruz wins the 2024 election?
Like, it's pretty simple. If you're a poor white man, in what ways have you benefited from your ancestors owning slaves?
Democrats are fucking allergic to the what about white people arguments. They don't care. They don't care because all they see is just aggregates and systems of oppression and, oh, who cares about that guy? You benefited off the backs of slavery even though fucking you've been fucked over by immigration or fucked over by fucking whatever.
Slaves. It's so boring.
It's so boring because it doesn't play to a narrative.
I'm so sad that so many of you have such a hard time understanding aggregates. Like, I understand now, I guess, why the stats argument is...
I think you have trouble dealing with this argument because it's a does not compute for lefties. They don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. Poor white people, they don't... It's like a communist, like poor landlords. What the fuck are you talking about? Like they're all rich and super decked out and just oppressing the proletariat. No, it's a really dumb worldview. You essentially have the same worldview in regards to systems of oppression and all that. You just take a different stance on it, which is really fucking funny because of how ass mad you get at communists, which is funny to watch sometimes.
So hard. But like Seal34_, I guess you'd be an example of a white person that clearly didn't benefit from the fucking education and wealth available to the United States because you're just as stupid as like any...
I think you just wanted to see if you would actually answer the question about poor white people. Just because something's not an aggregate doesn't mean we can't look into it. Like, fuck. That kind of mindset leaves a lot of fucking people behind. I guess as long as they're not black people, I don't know.
Random fuck from 200 years
Taking that whole JLP thing too seriously. You really love black people.
ago. Like, how fucking stupid are you? Like, when we talk about, like, when you're talking about benefits of a class, it doesn't mean every single person benefits, right? Like, you're unironically coming at me with the, like, well, Destiny, how do you explain the fact that there are some rich black people and poor white people? Like, how fucking stupid, Jim, and you're...
Notice the vitriol. It's just a simple question of, hey, what about these people? Clearly, is not interested in having that conversation.
Young as a man, people that are fucking 18 years old have massive muscle and burn fat of what you just did, 18 that don't work out. And the fuck kind of stupid fucking single time, right? So when you say something like, well, what about poor white people? How did they benefit from slaves? Who knows? Maybe if there were no slaves, maybe instead of poor white people, maybe they'd be dead white people. Or maybe their parents would have never fucking survived some fucking childbirth. Who the fuck knows? Like, on an aggregate, everything I say is true. For every single hyper-specific individual circumstance, of course not. This is why things fall on a distribution. This isn't why everything isn't exactly one thing. Like, Jesus Christ. Where would the money for reparations come from? I don't know, the federal fucking government.
Okay, sorry, I just sneezed. This displays a total lack of thought in regards to this. How does the federal government get their funding? I don't know, through taxation. So, well, fuck. How are you gonna get? So it would be kind of silly and redundant to tax black people, or the people who were slaves or descendants of slaves or whatever. You know what I mean? It'd be kind of redundant to tax those people for reparations. So it's kind of going to fall along, like, mostly racial lines. In aggregate, it'll follow along mostly racial lines. So it's going to be a lot of white people paying for a lot of black people's reparations. That will do fucking catastrophic things to race relations. Like, holy shit. Like, even if you introduce this, like, hyper-utopian complex system of, oh, only these specific black people or whatever, that's not how most people are going to see it. They're just going to see that I did nothing wrong. I'm paying for these black people's reparations, and they're probably using it on Nikes or whatever dumb shit. They're not using it to improve their lives. That's how most people are going to see it. I just wonder if Democrats don't ever think about the downsides of their fucking policies, like redistribution of wealth. If I go so far as say, oh, federal government just taxes the rich, okay, but the rich tend to not stick around, because if there's one thing that Bernie bros are kind of right about rich people is that they like to have money. So why would they stick around? And you're literally looking at this fucking in New York. Cuomo's literally doing like the baby come back. You can blame it all on me. Like fucking come back, I'll cook. Rich people come back. My city's a fucking wasteland. All the rich people have left because our fucking policies. God. But okay, we can. I just don't think it's moral to, based on some character, like, it seems like it would be punishing you for doing good. Like, oh, you made the risk and did this business and whatnot, and now you're getting fucked, being taxed 70-80% because there are poor people that, blah, blah, blah. Like, that doesn't feel good for the rich people. They're human, too. I mean, that's one of my biggest problems with the Bernie Sanders crowd, is they're very dehumanizing to rich people. Like, a lot of the stuff they say about the 1% kind of sounds Nazi-ish. Like, oh, they own the media. Oh, they blah, 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 blah. Like, they own the banks, or they disseminate propaganda for their interests. They're trying to spread, like, I don't know. It kind of feels weird, man.
Destiny, what about European immigrants, you fucking moron? You just hate white people. What? You're so stupid.
I mean, his unwillingness to talk about that previous topic kind of... I don't know if he hates white people. I know he loves black people.
Stupid. It's crazy how identitarian and racialized conservatives become when you fucking talk about anything.
Holy shit. Put on fucking Alanis Morissette, because that was ironic as shit. Oh my god. Okay. Conservatives aren't the ones looking at systems and structures. That's a problem. You have a collectivist mindset, so to him, there's no difference between a Richard Spencer or like a Nick Fuentes versus like a Ted Cruz or a Ben Shapiro. Like, these people are fundamentally different, or not fundamentally the same, because he's viewing them as a class of Republicans, so he's lumping them all in together. But don't you do that to Black Lives Matter? Oh no. Oh no.
Anything. I don't give a fuck. We're not talking right now about black people.
The problem is you just fundamentally don't understand how that shit would kind of pan out. The taxation would become like along racial lines. Because, I mean, I guess maybe if the federal government has enough money stored up, but still, that would be kind of like, oh, my taxation from this year or whatever is being used on this instead of something productive. That would still cause, like, generally the same kind of cultural impact.
Okay? We don't give a fuck about black people, and I'm not talking about white
JLP is sad.
people. We don't give a fuck about white people. I'm talking about people that used to be
You clearly don't. It's fine, whatever.
enslaved as a matter of policy in the United States. There are black people here today that wouldn't get reparations. People that immigrated here from some place who are black from like the 1900s aren't part of this conversation. We're talking about people that used to be slaves in the United States. That's who.
The problem is most forms of reparations pushed by the Democrats just don't include this. They don't think about it. It is exactly what people are saying, that it's just revenge against white people for what happened a long time ago. And it's not fair to the people who are living today, because they didn't enslave black people. Most of them, like, a lot of them aren't racist, but, like, I guarantee you'd see more racism and bad, like, race relations if this policy were to go through.
Who we're talking about. It's not about being black or white. Practically, how could you determine fairly who gets what? How would you determine whose families represented in the past? Was 18, first U.S. census includes slaves. Fuck, there was 18, is it 1870? 1874? Why is this date popping up? I don't remember. I had all this information handy for was it 1790? I know that there was a census that happened, and it was like the first census that included all the prior like slave families. It was the first time that like every African American had been included in the census. Is it not a fair contention if you immigrated over the past 20 years? No, that's what I'm saying. Reparations aren't about white people giving money to black people.
Problem is that's always how it's going to be, how it's going to pan out. There might be a couple black people that won't get this reparations and will have to be taxed for it. But, I mean, that's just going to cause infighting. Like, hey, just because my family moved here, like I should be getting some of this shit. And the white people are going to be all pissed that they're paying for reparations for a lot of black people, or black people as they would say it. They would just see it as like a racial alliance thing. And that's how it would be implemented by pretty much every Democrat politician that even accepts this stupid idea, but whatever.
Reparations are about paying on a debt that's owed. That's it.
The problem is white people as a class did not make this promise. It was a couple people making this promise. That's what you don't understand. It's a couple people made this promise and reneged on it. Why should white people? And I know you would take umbrage with this. I'm sticking to it that majority of white people will pay for it. You kind of have to, unless you have enough. Like, think of how much of a fucking waste that would be. To waste all on like. All right, here's my issue. I'm going to give you kind of a gross analogy. I apologize for that. Imagine you're having trouble going to the bathroom. Like, do you think it would be more wise to eat more food if that were the case? No. The problem is the narrow tunnel that it's not being able to go through. How do you widen that tunnel? Things like school choice. And it could just be, there are a couple, like, it could just be like vouchers, or it could be like cutting back regulations and making like non-public schools be more competitive. Sorry, trying to find the words. And make it to where they can compete with the public schools. But, like, I just don't think the public schools are working for black people right now. Like, I think we should allow better options. Because I think we all agree that, you know, if you get a good education, that will, like, get you a lot of wealth that then you can pass down. Like, that's why you don't think the, you know, free college or whatever, you think that's kind of dumb. Because you get a lot of money out of it for getting, like, the big degrees and all that stuff. I personally think trade school should be able, like, you should be able to go to trade school and basically make the same amount of money, or like have it be competitive with college as well, so it's not just one monopolized like figure of you have to go to this. Like, there should be options. That's what I want. A free market for basically everything, whether it's schools or medicine or fucking. It's what I'm into. That's what I dig.
Okay, let's just read for a little bit. I'm sorry, because apparently I don't know what the fuck people think any of this shit is. The truth behind 40 Acres and a Mule. We've all heard the story of the 40 Acres and a Mule promise to former slaves. It's a staple of black history lessons, and it's the name of Spike Lee's film company. The promise was the first systematic attempt to provide a form of reparations to newly freed slaves, and was astonishingly radical for its time, proto-socialist in its implications. In fact, such a policy would be radical in any country today. The federal government's massive...
See, he says something that kind of makes my argument.
Confiscation of private property, some 400,000 acres, formerly owned by Confederate landowners, and its methodical redistribution of former black slaves. What most of us haven't heard is that the idea really was generated by black leaders themselves. It is difficult to stress adequately how revolutionary this idea was. As the historian Eric Foner puts it in his book, Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877, here in coastal South Carolina and Georgia, the prospect beckoned for transformation of Southern society more radical even than the end of slavery. Try to imagine how profoundly different the history of race relations in the United States would have been had this policy been implemented and enforced. Had the former slaves actually had access to the ownership of land, of property, if they had a chance to be self-sufficient economically, to build, accrue, and pass on wealth. After all,
I'm sure there was a solution that is probably, like, that seems, even it's admitting that's a pretty fucking radical solution. Like, I mean, you had a discussion we were talking about what's politically feasible that we can actually get votes on. That seems like a pretty radical solution. I feel like we should just, I don't know what the solution would have been at the time. I don't know much about that time in history, but I just fundamentally am against, like, super radical solutions like that, especially when it comes to, like, redistributing land, which is fucking crazy.
One of the principal promises of America was the possibility of average people being able to own land and all that such ownership entailed. As we know all too well, the promise was not to be realized for the overwhelming majority of the nation's former slaves, who numbered about 3.9 million. We have been taught in school that the source of the policy of 40 acres and a mule was Union General William T. Sherman's special field...
Okay, so it wasn't, hey, we're all white people are going to pay back this promise. It was William T. Sherman. Like, it was an individual guy who made the promise.
Order number 15, issued on January 16th, 1865. That account is half right. Sherman prescribed the 40 acres in that order, but not the mule. The mule would come later. But what meant...
Okay, so it was him and maybe a couple other people, but it was not a class of white people saying, hey, we're going to collectively pay you back for this shit. What would be good and a better way to implement this kind of, like, reparations or whatever is if you put up a charity and allowed people to donate. Then you could at least kind of, I guess the federal government could handle, like, who's it go to and stuff like that, but none of the federal money, like, no federal government money would go into it. It would be all, like, donations. Then all those extremely rich socialists would be put on the spot and say, hey, if you care about this issue, why not donate? You've got like Shauna Jen, Hassan, Philosophy Tube, Kyle Klinsky, I think, as well. Like, all these fucking people donate. Like, I think it'd be really interesting to see if they would do it.
Do you support cash payments or a broader investment/infrastructure program in traditionally black communities? I think that the only right way to do it, there are two ways to do it. One way which is more realistic, second way. First of all, fuck investment in black communities, or fuck any of that shit. If you were owed a debt, you should be paid in cash. I think that I
don't disagree when it's a debt between two individuals. The problem is, this just does not carry over to a class or race-based analysis. It just does not. And the fact that you said, I think I should have gone over it a little bit more, but you said, oh, just the federal government will pay for it. It's like the most dumb fuck Bernie bro answer to their, like, radical ass fucking ideas. Oh, how are you going to pay for that? Oh, the federal government. Okay, clearly you haven't put any thought into this. Like, that's what your reaction would be. Like, it seems like, this is my theory, you got hyped up on some dumb lefty bullshit and said, okay, yeah, this is a good idea, without thinking about anything. Like, oh, the federal government can oppose it. Well, what kind of shit, like, what kind of cultural impacts would people's tax money going towards this? What kind of cultural mix would it have? How effective would it be? Like, it just seems like you didn't really think much about it. You probably mentioned it on stream and then just got into arguments about it with your chat. Would be my guess. I wonder if you think more about all your other solutions, all your other political ideas. It's like, if you don't think about the downsides of shit, like, your ideas are going to be crazy fucking radical. I hope you kind of rethink some shit and like, hey, what are the downsides of this?
To do reparations in forms of like a community and
because like the only downside Destiny's given against like school choice, like, oh, not everybody's going to be able to get a voucher. Well, that's not the only avenue. That's not the only vector for attack and, freeing up the solutions for schools. Like, we need to make these other schools more competitive with public schools. I think anyone who's gone into like, go talk to Mr. Medeker. Like, I know you did a debate with him. He's gone through he wanted to be a teacher and all that. He'll describe to you just how shit the public school system is. Like, I feel like we need alternatives. I think that will help people way, way fucking more than just giving them money.
investment would be like working a
Like, that's a way to pay back that you're not I guess in a way you are paying back that debt, but in a different way. In a way that is like not just going to help black people, but also help white people. It's not a racialized thing, so it's not going to have that cultural impact. Like, you'll see more black people being able to get out of this like impoverished kind of areas and like be able to pass down wealth. That would be a way better solution than just giving a bunch of them cash. Because with the education, let's say if you did, now they'd know what to do with it.
job at McDonald's or something, and then they give you a card to pay for like your school or some shit, and they're like, okay, well, here's your wages, you're getting paid $7.25 an hour, but you're
giving individualist fucking examples to suit a collectivist narrative. It's just not gonna work, my dude.
have to spend that money how we tell you. If a debt is owed, then a debt should be paid, I think. Not.
But I'm repeating myself. I hate when I repeat myself in debunk videos, but like, it just doesn't work collectively. It just doesn't.
Not like, okay, well, we know that you owe you $1 million, but we're going to go ahead and invest that money for you anyway. But like, you'll be chill with it, right? It's cool. Like, I think that it should be paid in like fucking either cash or land. But
well, shit, was it the whole idea of land, like investing into that infrastructure so that they can accrue wealth? Wouldn't education basically be doing the same thing? I think my system would help black people way more than yours does.
obviously the land's not going to happen. I have concerns about this, but I get it. I understand there are concerns. So the analogy that I gave before, and I guess it triggers some people, but like if you paid it out to black people and you're the most racist person in the world and you're worried that they're going to waste it on fucking on fried chicken and watermelons or whatever crazy shit, even if every single black person wanted to waste every single dollar of their reparations, even if they wanted to, it's their fucking money. It's their right to do so.
True, but in order for them to get that money, you would have to take it from taxpayers. And therein lies a big problem. That's the taxpayers' money that you're taking to do something that isn't going to help them, or like might not help them, you know what I mean? But like, if that is the case and that's what they do, they don't actually do it to improve their lives or whatnot. Like, we would need at least some basic like education and financial literacy in order to make this even a worthwhile investment. It's not even going into the cultural impact, which will make things worse as far as race relations. But yeah, I just don't. Oh, sorry. I just banged my headphones trying to itch the back of my neck. I just don't agree.
You have no fucking right to tell somebody how to spend their money. Like, that's it. Like, it's as easy as that. No matter what you're
True, but again, you have to
worried about them wasting it, that's not your worry. It's theirs. It's their money. They have a right to spend it exactly how they want, even if it is.
But don't you think we should allow them good education avenues to make sure they're making the right decision when they spend that money? Because essentially what we're doing now is if we were to give them money now, we are basically robbing them of the opportunity to make better use of that money because they don't have the education necessary to make use of that money. And a lot of them will just use it on frivolous things, I think. Doesn't mean I'm not racist, but I mean just like, if people are fucking financially illiterate, like, look at fucking YouTubers and streamers, like Wings of Redemption. Didn't he buy like 4 trucks or something crazy like that? Like, he didn't bank it or do anything smart. Like, people are just financially illiterate. And that got, like, black or white, doesn't matter. So I think people need the education to be able to know what to do with that money. And I think you would agree. It's funny because it's a very conservative mode of thought that you have to be smart with your money. But yeah.
Is less effective.
Not that liberals in general aren't, but I mean, like, it's called conservative for a reason. You get what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to generalize liberals or whatever.
Effective at alleviating the okay, I can't. Okay, I'm done talking about this now because I feel like I've said the same thing a million times, but for some reason it's not clicking. Reparations are not about alleviating the suffering of Black America. Reparations are not about catching anybody up. Reparations are not about making anybody's life better. Reparations are about paying a debt that's owed. I don't know how many other times or how many other ways that I can keep talking.
The problem is, if it were implemented, I've said this before, if it were implemented, it probably wouldn't be implemented in the way that you would want. It would just be based, like, Black people get this money, white people have to pay for this. Yeah, like, I'm sorry, dude, but, like, your fantastical utopian system of, oh, everybody who's a descendant of it's weird too. Like, they were descendant. It's like, yeah, like, I would maybe understand it if it were like, okay, we enslaved you. Here's Capra. Like, I would understand that because it's like, okay, sorry, we fucked up. It was in that time. Like, it would be going to people who actually were enslaved. I guess the argument is, like, because they weren't given a better start, they can't accrue wealth and all that. But yeah, I don't know. I think I've stated some pretty good reasons as to why I don't like your system or the system that's being proposed.
Walking around that before some other fucking dipshit in chat types, well, what if it doesn't help their problems? Like, I don't know how many other ways I can say the exact same thing to you guys. Sorry, I'm like.
What good is a political policy if it isn't a solution to a problem?
Go post in a subreddit about it. I don't know how many other ways I can say it. All right. Wasn't it a gift? Why call it take it back as a debt as a gift? Well, it was a promise that was made, and then the American government like stepped back on it. Like, do you think that people would have been as comfortable with the resolution of the Civil War if this promise hadn't been made? How recently did you come to this conclusion? I feel like I've only heard the debt promise thing sort of recently, because for my life, I guess because I'm a white person, I had no fucking.
Dude, this kind of racialized, like, weird stuff is weird. And you call conservatives identitarian, but you're like, me as a white person, before you say shit. It's weird.
Idea that any promises had ever been made. When people talk about reparations, I always thought it was just like, oh, like, well, we enslaved you guys, and it was pretty wrong, so we should pay you back for it. And that sounds kind of like, yeah, I guess. So that sounds like kind of dumb. But I'd never.
But that's the mainstream. Well, it's not mainstream. It's really fucking radical. But, like, that's the way it's being pitched. Not that there was a debt that was owed and blah, blah, blah. I think you're the only person who's come to that conclusion. But, like, if it were to be put through, like, Kamala Harris would do it just the racialized way. Like, that's how it would be done. So, yeah, you could propose this utopian solution. I don't buy it. But, I mean, like, yeah, I guess I just don't agree. I think there are better avenues to helping poor people. I think that the divide, if we want to do, like, reductionist shit, I think the divide should be, like, lower population / rural versus, like, higher population / city. Like, that, I feel like it's a more important divide. Because, you know, rural people, you know, there are problems they face, and city people are usually pretty dependent. They get their food, and they don't have to think about it. Yeah. I think it'd be more. I don't like this fucking collectivist shit, but I mean, if we're going to look through shit in that lens, probably better to do it through, like, rural versus city kind of lens.
Never heard of, like, oh, there were actually promises made that were broken. I'd never actually heard that before. But when I started to do a little bit more reading about that, I was like, oh, wait, hold on. Wait, this is actually really fucked up. This is actually super fucked. Like, if a specific promise was made, and this is a promise that probably would have been leading to long-term wealth building in African American communities, and then that promise was broken, like, that probably should be made right on. Remember to hit that like and subscribe.
I think there are better ways to do it than the way you or other people are suggesting. I stand by the cultural issues that it will spring up. That, I mean, like, people will probably become more racist because they see that their taxpayer dollars are going towards this, and they probably won't see the nuance of it. Most people won't see the nuance of it. They'll just see the base, like, they'll see it as racialized, which it probably would be if it were implemented. But yeah, I just disagree. I feel like school choice is the best, like, way to help black people who are in a bad situation, or just people who are in a bad situation anyway. Like, I feel like if we have more competition and more avenues for people, like more ways for people to go. Like, they're not stuck with this one shitty option. And yeah, I mean, we all agree that getting a good education will definitely get you a lot of wealth that you can pass down to your son, your your offspring or whatever. But yeah, it's later than I thought. Done with this video. Yeah. I just agree to disagree, I guess.